Chapter 35. Pledging Swords. The day had come at last. Only mere hours after the Faldetian runners returned to the castle with the news, the council was summoned one last time. It was all true. The invaders of Talgarth were indeed coming with 6,000 strong on foot and more on horseback, and would arrive on the doorstep of Paladar the next day. King Brackmore was to oversee a final council of war with his son, Commander Olam, and the 5 messengers from Tritus. Caleb and Layla walked side by side down the stony halls toward the upper chambers where the council was to be held, with Anselm and the other 2 women behind them. They had all changed back into their travel clothes and cloaks but had left their weapons at the rooms, all but Leothrin. She never went anywhere without her twin swords, and no one ever questioned her. "It feels odd to be wearing these clothes again," Layla said, scratching the back of her neck. She had tied her hair back in an attempt to reduce the irritation, but it didn't seem to be helping. "Honestly, it does look a bit odd," Caleb said. "I had just gotten used to you wearing dresses again." "I couldn't very well wear it to the council," she said. "It would be silly, and they would take me even less seriously than they already do." "What do you mean?" "All of them look at me like I'm a lost dog," she said, shaking her head. "You are a captain, Ansel is a warden, Alastra is a sage, and Leothrin is, well, Leothrin. Just one look at her swords and her eye patch will convince anyone she is fit for such a meeting. But me? I am just a woman. I'm not a fighter. I cannot do anything to help in this war." "Avoiding this battle is something to be glad about," Caleb said. He realized his comment was not what she wanted to hear, and changed his train of thought to comfort her another way. "Besides, you know you can handle yourself in a fight. I've seen it. You crossed 2 kingdoms to get here and warn the king, didn't you?" She sighed and shrugged. "I don't know. I just feel out of place." "You shouldn't," Caleb said. "And besides, if we can find some answers about your abilities, maybe one day they will be of more use than a blade." She looked at him and nodded. "Perhaps," she agreed with a little more verve. "Oh, and by the way, Elastra may be acting a little strange today, but do not worry, all right." "A little strange? Is she all right?" Caleb asked, looking back at her walking with her brother and Leothrin. "Oh, she is fine," Layla said. "It's this." She held up her hand, showing Caleb the ring he had given her. I did not want to draw attention to it, but Leothrin, perceptive as always, took notice almost immediately and asked. I did not say much else on the matter, and I think Alastra was glad for that. Caleb's mouth twisted. He could not help but feel a little sorry. Alastra was a dear friend, and he knew how she felt. The last thing he wanted to do was hurt her. "The tension in the room was heavy," Layla continued. "But Leothrin led the conversation somewhere else, and for the better. She does not say much when we are all together, but you would be surprised." "I would rather keep out of that," Caleb said. They started up the stairs to the 4th level of the castle, and passed into the wide hall with tall windows that connected them to the western wings. They continued on to the door in the far right corner, and there they met Olam. He was wearing full armor again, which made him look even thicker than before, and had a sword buckled to his belt. His golden hair was neatly pulled straight back out of the way, and his face bore his familiar kindness. "Thank you for coming, Sir Caleb. Sir Anselm. Ladies," he said, nodding to each of them in turn. "We are just about ready to begin. Please follow me." He led them into the doorway, and up the spiraling stairs of the tower. As he had several times that week on the way to the council room, Caleb glanced at the land far below out the narrow slits cut out of the stone as he climbed higher. The ground was faint of color, and amidst the light haze that always seemed to roll in around the rocks before Paladar, he could see patches of grass in the otherwise brown, earthy plains. The land seemed sad and cold. At the top of the stairs they came to a hallway with several doors, and with the approval of 3 nearby guards, Olam led them through the large one in the center. Inside, the circular room boasted thick red carpet, with a large table in the middle. Another skinnier wooden table traced the edge of the room, seating both familiar and new faces. Some of them were generals or captains, and a few of their own wardens, but at the end closest to the door were old wrinkled men holding ink and pen whose purpose he could not tell. Across the room stood 3 younger men who looked as though they had just walked out of a hurricane. They were covered in sweat from head to toe, and their hair was matted to their faces. They all wore light clothing that was covered in dirt and mud, and each of them breathed heavily. At their feet were large buckets of water. Olam led them along the table to the end where 5 seats remained vacant, and gestured for them to sit. He then took his place by the table at the center of the room, where King Brackmore stood absorbed in a pile of papers and a large map of the city pegged down to the wood. He was dressed in formal clothing threaded with red and gold with an ornament about his wrinkled head, and wore a sword at his side as well. After whispering with Olam and pointing to a few other things on the table, he turned and faced them all. "Thank you for coming, all of you," he said. "As you and the entire city are well aware, war is upon us. For those of you present who have not yet had the pleasure of meeting them, these 5 men and women from Tritis brought us the distressing news that the invaders from Talgarth come from across the sea." All present muttered and nodded to the 5 of them in a gesture of approval and thanks. Caleb looked down the row at his companions. Alastra certainly enjoyed the attention, but Anselm fumbled through his record book ready to take some kind of notes. Leothran was listening silently to the king with one hand on her chin, as if they had not even been acknowledged. Lastly, he looked at Layla next to him, and she gazed blankly back, outwardly still feeling sheepish and out of place. "We cannot expect Manon to help us. Beside their usual indifference, we have confirmed they have entered into a treaty with the invaders in order to save their own people," King Brackmore went on. "They did not spare even one soldier when Fort Ellery at our borders was attacked." More mutters came from the listeners. "Not more than an hour ago, 3 of our best runners returned with current reports of the coming force," he said, gesturing to the dirty men against the wall. "I have asked them to report." The king stepped back and nodded to one of the runners. He stepped forward and cleared his throat, speaking hastily. "We saw their armies approaching from the south bearing the crest of the Crimson Sun. It was made up of both men and Gruuls, and from what we could see, there were at least 5,000 footmen and 200 riders, but we could see movement of the Gruuls near the mountains and the lake. We presume they are flocking to join, and that their numbers could surpass 10,000 by the time they arrive tomorrow night." Louder murmurs sprang up, but the king silenced them with the stretch of his hand. "If this were the end of our concerns, it would be well," said the runner. "But there is something else. No doubt all of you have heard by now, the ghost stories of the devouring shadows at Fort Ellery. Creatures that do their bidding. We have reason to believe that these are shadow walkers come with them from the Estelans. We saw the animals from afar, great wildcats that stood nearly twice as tall as a man when on 4 legs. And we found the paw prints afterwards as large as tree stumps." "Shadow walkers," Olam exclaimed. "Fate help us if they have brought those ancient menaces here. Their great evil is what has turned the Estelans into a war-torn savage land. If they bring this vile race with them, then we face great peril." The voices of all the others in the room echoed his thoughts even more aggressively, shouting curses and saying that fate should burn them all. Caleb glanced at Leothran. She seemed unoffended, but gave him a look that said she would not be changing shape within 100 leagues of Paladar. Caleb had been wondering for days if he should tell King Brackmore about Leothran's identity. He and Anselm had left the dragon out of the account of the Tritis attack, and figured the subject may be relevant at a later time, but now he knew he was gravely mistaken. "Shadow walkers or not," King Brackmore said, silencing the room. "They come all the same, and there is no stopping that. Paladar is strong and is well equipped to beat back cats no matter how large, along with their Gruuls and men. Olam, drop the map." The runner bowed, returned to the wall, and they all moved aside as Olam came and pulled on a rope dangling from above. A wide roll of fabric unfurled, revealing a bird's-eye view of the city of Paladar and the surrounding countryside. As the king and Olam began to explain to the newcomers the beginnings of the battle plan, Caleb's thoughts wandered. The invaders bring more of the Sartir with them. Then they also must be under control by the mind jewels. If they come to fight, I wonder if they are from the same warring clan as Leothran. Could there be a way to kill the wardens controlling them? If so, we could turn the tide of battle. He focused again on the map and Olam, as he pointed to sections of it with a stick, explaining in a loud voice what was to happen when their enemies arrived. He explained that the first line of defense was to be on the plains of Faldesia, and that their main objective was to keep the enemy from crossing the wide bridge that led into the city at all costs and, if possible, repel them then and there. Olam said that he would be leading this maneuver, and if it went ill, they would fall back to the bridge. Caleb remembered well the defenses they had set up there. The towers on each corner and the oil ready to set it to fire would make passage over the bridge impossible. He listened as Olam continued to explain in detail the pikes that had been built in the banks of the river, along with the mounds of dirt piled on both sides to make crossing even more difficult. The bridge would be the second line of defense. The third and last, Olam explained, would be the small area of land before the city wall. By that point the situation would be dire, and this became the most effective time to employ the wardens. They would be posted atop the city wall, ready to cast their hexes down upon the enemy before their last stand. Olam explained every detail of every stage of the battle, who would be leading each of them, alternate emergency plans, the order of operations each general was to perform, and on and on. Over the next hour, the more they discussed, the more Layla looked as though she was struggling to pay attention. "How are you faring?" Caleb leaned over and whispered. "All right. But now I know why I felt out of place before," she whispered back. "Because I am out of place. I've had no idea if he's been talking about us or the enemy for the past half an hour." Caleb smiled and she attempted the same, shaking her head. "How could you bear this for all these years?" "You get used to it. It is mostly just procedure." Olam and the rest of the council eventually settled all of the organizational plans, and King Brackmore nodded in approval. Each of the generals around the table stood one by one in order, and reported back to Olam their individual duties before bowing to the king and sitting back down. The old men at the far end of the table that Caleb had seen before were scribbling hastily in their books with their ink, and Caleb recognized that they were scribes. At last the general that sat to Caleb's left took his seat, and all eyes were on them. "We owe all 5 of you our thanks," King Brackmore said to them, "for warning us of the coming danger, and also in providing sound advice to an enemy you have already faced. In the face of this great peril, you are free to return home should you so desire. We expect nothing more than the aid you have already provided." Caleb stood in all of their behalf and before he spoke, looked over his companions. They all nodded, knowing what he would have asked them. "Your Highness, we stand by what we said before. We stay and fight. By leaving Paladar now, we would be leaving all of the Westerlands to the Maw of Talgarth. Sir Olam, I will ride under your banner at the front if you will have me." "It would be my honor," Olam said with a broad pleased smile and bowed. A few chairs down the table, Elastra stood and Anselm followed. "I am Elastra Flitchett, Sage of Tritus in Avondale under the order of High Sage Fridmorton of the Westerlands. And this is my brother, Captain Anselm Flitchett, also a powerful warden. The 2 of us were born and raised here in Paladar, and we are prepared to die for it now." The others in the room gaped at them, especially at Elastra, and excited whispers surged up again. "It has been an honor to have you with us, Sage Flitchett," King Brackmore said. "Your grace and wisdom has been an inspiration amongst our wardens. Your aid, along with that of Captain Anselm, will be most appreciated." "A sage atop the wall would indeed put us at ease," Olam added happily. "Sage Elastra, would you be willing to take command of the wardens there? If the battle comes to that point, you too will be our hope for victory." Anselm and Elastra agreed. "I will also fight with Sir Olam," Leothran said, standing as the others had. Since they walked in the room, everyone had been shooting curious glances at her, no doubt wondering why such a beautiful dark-haired woman with one eye and matching swords at her side was in their midst. Now that she spoke, she revealed she had an accent as well, and everyone stared at her, waiting for more. "I am Leothran Marley, and am of the people of the Esterlands myself. I have witnessed firsthand Talgarth's rise to full strength. I will fight at the front." Caleb's feet tingled as he anticipated her telling them all her true identity as a Sartir, but she ended at that. Poor Layla was now the only member of their group still sitting, and stood awkwardly to join the rest. I will help where I can as well," she stuttered. It seemed Olam recognized her shame and spoke quickly. My Lady Starlehand, if it were not for you and your courage, we would all be unprepared for the coming battle. Your help has been invaluable. All of you, we thank you. Tomorrow we fight for Paladar, Faldesia and all the Westerlands." After King Brackmore had said a few last words, one of the older gentlemen gave a prayer to fate for their success, and the meeting was dismissed until they would report the following day to their assigned posts. "So, what of this report of other Saar coming with Talgarth, Leo?" Anselm asked as they all walked together back toward their rooms. "So they are being controlled by more of the Seer Tarn." He had spoken Caleb's exact question. Leothran shook her head sadly. "I cannot be certain. But I fear they are not." "You mean to say that they are fighting for Talgarth by choice?" Elastra asked. "Isn't Talgarth at war with your people in the Esterlands?" "Yes, they are," Leothran responded. "But the runners mentioned that they saw great wildcats. Such creatures exist in the Great Waste, but they are only common far into the mountains where few can venture and return alive. I fear those who march with Talgarth are none other than the clan that has given my people such a fearful reputation in your lands. These are black of heart and use their fate-given gifts as a means to bring harm." "A different clan than your own, then?" Anselm asked. Leothran nodded. "Anciently, the Saar were one, unified as they made the 500-year exodus from the Heartland to the Hidden Lands. But in time humans found their way here from beyond the Great Waste, coming in ships and bringing with them the sister blades that fate crafted, one of which now lies with your father Caleb. The Saar only enjoyed several hundred years of peace before men came following with the very thing my people had fled, war. The sister blades are the source of conflict and hatred in this world, and in the wake of their wrath my people began to fall. In time, differing ideals and opinions divided the Saar. Some concealed their abilities and lived among the humans as best they could. Others fled and sought solitude, only harming others when defense was required. This was my own way of life before Talgarth captured me. This other clan has one ultimate goal, to end all but their own lives. They hate humans for stealing their peace, and the rest of my own people for betraying them and choosing loathsome coexistence over violence. For years they have used their abilities to deceive and murder others. Among the humans of the East there is a falsity, that they can even change their form into shadows. Thus many call all of the Saar shadow walkers. Insulting to say the least." "I see why now," Caleb said. "So you think that these men have joined with Talgarth? They must be the gift the Queen spoke of in Manon. But did you not say they hate humans also? Why would they help them?" "I would suppose," Leothran replied. "They recognize the might of Talgarth as a way to destroy many of their other enemies first. An army free of cost. And I would wager that if Talgarth were to gain domination, the clan would turn and destroy them also." "That is horrible," Layla said. "That is brilliant," Elastra contended. Layla shot her a look. "Horrible, true. But quite brilliant. What better way for a small nation of extremists to eliminate a world population? Anyway, a dragon would trounce the lot of them single-handedly. It's a shame you won't be able to use that power of yours for this fight. With how all of them were talking in there, they'd burn you at the stake if they found out." "I should not have to," Leothran said. "And yes, it may be best to keep it a secret for now. It would be too dangerous to change amidst all of the fighting. My swords can handle what is required just fine." "Indeed they can. I shall be counting on your defense on the front with those twin blades of yours," Caleb said. "Both Olam and I." The five of them finally came to the hall of their rooms. Evening was quickly approaching, and as always dinner would be brought to them shortly. They had all decided that they should retire early and gather their strength. They reached the women's door first, and before they entered, Caleb asked Layla to come with him a few paces down the hall. "We will be back in a moment," he said. "Leothran. Ella. Rest well." Anselm watched the two of them walk away side by side whispering. He thought he could hear Caleb ask if she was feeling all right, and could guess his motivation. She had always had mixed emotions before Caleb left for a battle or an expedition from King Hallis back home, and rightly so. But more than that, Ever since Layla had mentioned that she was receiving the strange visions of knowledge, she had seemed to be growing more and more distant. He knew she took comfort in all of them, but nobody more than Caleb. He would take care of her like he always had, and for that Anselm was glad. The odd thought returned to his mind that perhaps one day he could do the same for Leothran. Fool. She doesn't need me. He glanced at her and saw that she and his sister were both watching Caleb and Layla. She'll be all right, he said to reassure them. It's never easy to see people you love go to war, especially when there is so little you can do to help. I understand, Leothran said. She is a strong woman and has shown tremendous potential with what little I have taught her, but she is not ready for something like this. She knows that. I think that's why it's so difficult for her, Anselm said. She'll be all right. She is lucky to have friends like you three, said Leothran. I think I will go outside for a moment and wander. To clear my mind. It has been a long time since I have had the leisure to properly prepare for a battle. This eye cover of mine requires a good deal of adjustment in my technique. I bid the two of you good night. She smiled and left Anselm and his sister. Anselm instantly had an urge to go with her, but knew it would be odd, and didn't want to interrupt whatever process she went through to prepare. They watched her disappear down the stairs at the end of the hallway, and even as she did, a servant appeared, coming their way. At first they thought he was going to be bearing the food for the night, but he had no carts or trays with him and he was alone. All he carried was a large leather bag. Neither of them had time to wonder what he was about, when he noticed them standing there and scurried toward them. Ah. Most excellent, he said as he bowed. Lady Elastra and Sir Anselm, this is for you. What is it? Asked Anselm. A gift sent from the city. I am afraid that is all I have been told. Elastra took the bag from him and he gave a final bow. Have a pleasant evening, he said, then retreated to the stairs. Elastra held the bag up to her face and examined it. She looked at Anselm, and he shrugged, following her into the women's bedroom. His sister sat on the bed, and began to work at the tightly drawn leather strings that held the bag closed. Anselm stood in front of her with his arms folded. At the last moment it crossed his mind that somehow someone, perhaps the pale stranger that attacked them in Shorewell, had sent them something dangerous, but his sister pulled open the bag before he could voice his concern. She held the top wide open and stared into it with a blank expression. Well, what's in it? Anselm asked impatiently. She continued to stare, although her eyes were now filled with sadness. She let out a deep sigh, and removed from the bag a pair of new boots crafted from very expensive leather, and stitched with what Anselm recognized immediately as the toughest thread a boar could provide. The details hammered into the leather were exquisite, and the pair of boots looked as strong as steel. She placed them on the floor and removed a second pair, taller and more feminine than the first, but every bit as strong, with thick laces crossing back and forth across the face. The products of many hours of hard, dedicated labor. Anselm picked up the first pair of boots and saw almost at once what he was looking for, the old seal of the Flitchett family on the sole. He was speechless. He looked down at his sister. Elastra had placed the other pair of boots on the floor, and was fishing around for something else she had found at the bottom of the bag. She brought up a crinkled parchment with writing scribbled on its face. The writing was the basic scratching of a common city man that had not undergone royal schooling, something they had not seen for some time. She read it over, and handed it to Anselm, who took a seat by her side on the bed. There was not much. Good luck. Keep each other safe. Make us proud. Anselm was baffled. Thousands of buried emotions surged in his gut, but he suppressed them with some effort. And then, the unexpected happened. Elastra began to weep. At first he was simply shocked, and had to check to be sure she was not laughing. She held her head in her hands and let her golden hair fall over her face as she cried. Anselm had never seen her cry before. Not ever. When they were younger, she had comforted him many times, but never the other way. She was too strong. But now? He placed a hand on her back and patted her softly, as she gently smoothed the parchment over her knees. I've never understood you, Elastra said. All this time. Hiding from risk like a coward, I thought. She carefully folded the note and placed it in the pockets of her robes. Perhaps some things are worth holding on to. Anselm didn't know quite what to say. I'm a fool, she chuckled as she wiped her eyes. It's just the boots and Caleb. She didn't say anything in response but confirmed his guess with more soft tears. He cares for you deeply, Anselm said. You know this. I'm a fool. Fate smite me. I'm tired, that's all. Anselm didn't need her to explain her confusing words any more than she tried. He knew what she was feeling. He patted her back again. You're not a fool, he said. She wiped the last tears away and pulled her hair back away from her face as she sat up straight. Most of the time, he added. She looked at him and laughed when she saw his grin. They removed their old travel-worn boots and tried on the new ones. They fit perfectly.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.